In this video, we're going to try to distill 35 years of playing and 4,000 some gigs into a little small chunk of information for you to use. I've done some fancy licks, some more advanced stuff, some difficult moves, and I try to explain it as fully as possible. So take a look at it, refer to the book if you get a little bit confused. Understand that there's a lot of years and a lot of work behind all this, so if it's a little bit frustrating at first, bear with it, stick with it, don't be afraid of it. It's a video so you can back up, reverse, stop, slow motion, all those things. That'll help you out. I've been playing for a very, very long time, and a lot of these things are very much a part of my playing and my character and style as a player. So I want for you to become a unique individual stylist as well on your instrument. So you wouldn't necessarily be copying what I'm about to show you, but by seeing how I developed it and seeing how it came about and its evolution between the bass and the amp and my hands and all the component parts that you'll see illustrated here, you'll see how these things apply to you when you're playing, and you'll be able to, I hope, set a course for yourself so you can come up with your own unique style and your own unique take on what I do and what you're doing and other influences you'll have from other sources. So enjoy the video, and I hope you get a lot out of it, and I hope it's a big help to you. Something I'd like to cover is the relationship between the bass, my hands, the electronics, and the amp, and how that loop works. I noticed when I was very young and beginning, if I'd play something on my bass and it would make sense to me and I would be able to do it, I'd go out and plug into an amplifier and play live, and I couldn't do it. For some reason there was a difference between plugging into the amp and playing and me sitting at home playing. I could do all these little nuanced things and harmonics and bends, and I'd hear all this character to the playing. I'd plug into the amp and a lot of it would be gone. I wasn't sure why that was, and over the years and thousands of gigs, literally, I came to the conclusion that the dynamic range of the instrument, without being plugged in at all, is so much. The loudest note it can make and the quietest note it can make that you'll hear are only so much dynamic range, as we call it. When you plug the bass in, the electronics into an amplifier, suddenly expand the dynamic range artificially to a very much broader range. Some people prefer that. Some people like that. The effect of that really broad dynamic range is what they like, what they go for, and what they dig, and what feels right to their playing. That's fine. But for me, I had a hard time with it because it made the bass feel different to me than it felt to me sitting here right now if I have the volume controls down. There's certain things that I hear, that I feel, that I respond to, that when I plug it into an amp without compression, I don't feel. So that's why compression became a very important component to me. I'll give you a little demonstration. With compression, this is the low pickup, low frequency pickup from the low output into one amplifier. There's two pickups into two amps here. I can play without any problem. Okay, that's working for me now. Without compression, the loudest note is way louder than the quietest note, so it starts to throw me and makes my hands feel different on the bass. The point of explaining this is to explain the path I took to get up to a point of being able to play some fancy schmancy licks, and how that came about in relationship to the amp, because a lot of times people can do them, but they can't ever execute them or perform them live or make them work in the context of a band or a song, because there's a couple blocks here. One of them is this situation with compression in the amp. So when I put the compression on, it makes it feel more like the bass feels sitting in my lap in a quiet room, not plugged in. So that enables me to be able to harmonics are in there, all the character is there. You can go a little bit too far with compression sometimes too and lose all your dynamic range. You don't want to do that. I'll explain the settings to you in a minute. But basically, a little bit of compression goes a long way in bringing that dynamic range down to more of how the bass actually is when you've got just strings, steel strings on wood, rather than putting the component part of the electronics in there. It makes it a little bit easier. You'll notice on guitar amps, if you're going to have any one effect or a little button on an amp, it would be distortion. You'll notice on bass amps that they're going to include any one effect. It'll usually be compression. Compression to a bass is analogous to distortion on a guitar, because distortion basically is a form of compression. A sine wave, that wave you see on an oscilloscope, or if you've ever seen a frequency on an oscilloscope, it's a waveform. When you increase its amplitude so much that it can no longer be accommodated by the components electronically, it will crush itself down into a square wave, because the tops of those waves can't be reproduced. So it'll square them off at the top and at the bottom, and you'll see what's an actual square wave. So that is in effect what distortion is. So therefore distortion is a form of compression. That's why a guitar player, when he'll hold a note, you'll hear great like singing distortion coming out, because it's basically, I flipped the distortion on for a little bit more of an explanation, though it will do it without it pretty much, just to enhance it a little bit. But basically guitar players have been using that for a long, long time, and you'll notice how compression is kind of the natural effect for bass players, where distortion is for guitar players. There's a connection, though. There's a reason why. For a guitar player to play through an amplifier like a home stereo, like if he plugged his guitar into the input in the back of his home stereo with a real high fidelity sound and a huge amount of dynamic range, it's horrible. It sounds too clean, too clinical, too sterile. There's no harmonics. It's just a clicking, clacking, and some semblance of a note. It's a terrible thing. Try it sometime. You'll see my point. So a lot of bass players get into a very clean, broad dynamic range amps, and they're having the same problem, but not really even realizing it. I see sometimes a bass player on stage trying to execute the things he knows he can, and he can't pull it off. And the natural thing you gravitate towards is turn the amp up. Turn the amp up louder. I can't quite feel I can't feel it the way I need to feel it, so they turn it up louder and louder and louder. In a way, they're kind of almost subconsciously trying to get some compression by turning the amp up so loud it will no longer reproduce things accurately, and will start to square those waves off, like I mentioned in distortion. So he's basically, whether he knows it or not, he's kind of longing for that compression, just to bring that dynamic range down and make the bass feel more like it's supposed to feel in his hands. So that's one of the very, very important components of my playing, to be able to play a lot of fancy schmancy stuff, loud, live, and also to be able to make it fit in context with the band and not stick out, and make me feel comfortable as a player. So when I'm on the stage, it helps me to interact, get my bass to fit in with the sound of everything else. There's a lot of compression on there right now. There's still a dynamic range as well. So there's a happy medium. I have I'm not sure what the ratio is. I'll go over that in a minute. But you have to experiment with it for yourself, because it is a feel thing. How much compression you need, what type of compression you need, if you want to do it. And it is an advanced thing. So be prepared sometime to just sit down with a compressor plugged in, with your bass plugged into it, fiddle around with the knobs and find out what each one does and how it affects what you're playing. Or start with a small one like an MXR Dynacomp or a little compressor. Just basically get the idea of what compression is and how it works. Use it sparingly at first, and eventually you'll find a point where you can, a happy medium, we can get the kind of compression that gives you the dynamic range that you need as a bass player sonically in the band, but still squashes things down enough so you can start to have the thing feel the way it should feel in your hands. A phenomenon that I notice is without compression, the strings actually feel farther and farther and farther oddly from the neck. And it actually will feel to me sometimes like I'd have to step on the bass and hit it with a hammer to get the note even to sound, where in fact the action hasn't changed at all. It's just plugging into an amp with a huge amount of dynamic range that's made it feel like that. So take that, and hopefully that'll be some help. So here's some examples of some settings and what I do and why I do it. Compressors can have different amounts of controls. Some are just one knob, compression, yes, no, on, off. And sometimes that's good. That means all the other parameters are preset into a character that they felt would be the right compression setting, and many times it is. On the Ampeg SVT amps, they have a compressor knob. And compression the onboard compression is great. Basically, you turn it on and it sounds pretty good. If you want to get into tweaking it in a more elaborate way, there are other controls, and some of them have unusual names: gain, threshold, ratio, attack, release. you know, slope. I've seen slope on compressors before. There's a lot of ways. What they're talking about is all the ways that the compressor affects your sound. And you can get a compressor with one knob or get one with 5. I have the actually there's 6 knobs on mine. There's an input and output knob as well. But just for an example, on my clean, I have my inputs and outputs are something you're just going to have to balance between what you have it plugged into and what you have plugged into it. So you get decent meters moving, and the input and output you get some. That's the output meters being monitored now. So basically, if I put it in, got a little quieter there. You'll notice sometimes when you add compression, you're going to have to make adjustment on the output level. There's a lot of compression on that. You see all the way. It's the this meter is how much gain is being reduced, and this is what the actual output is. My settings, I have a ratio here of a little bit over 10 to 1 ratio, compression ratio. My attack is almost off, and my release is almost off. So what happens is the compression occurs right away, and it releases right away. If the release is very long, takes it a long time to go back to normal volume there. You see that knob takes a long, those lights take a long time to go down. If the attack is very high, you get that first click, you get the first note of the string at full dynamic range, and then the compression comes in later. So I want the compression to begin right away. At the beginning of my notes, my attack is down low. So that's a basis. I got a lot of emails, people asking me about what the settings are for compression. Usually I use release and attack all the way down. A ratio between 10 and 20 to 1, and this one particularly this is an Ashley audio compressor. The model CLX52, in case you're wondering. But there's a zillion compressors out there, many of them. But this is a good example of a compressor that has a little some of the extra knobs that you might need. Now down to the compressor on the Ampeg, it's just basically it says compression and there's one knob, so you can have it on or off. So it's a good idea sometimes to get a one knob compressor, try it without. Fool around with it with no compression, gradually bring the compression and see, aha, that's what it does. And you'll find you'll feel a little pump there when you hit the note. The volume kind of sucks back and then pushes back out again. Better compressors pump less. Cheaper ones pump more. Some people like the pumping sound or the action of that. Some people don't. It's all a matter of taste. So use those things in your criteria for judging what you might want as a compressor. And again, I would suggest starting out with a single knob compressor or a 2-knob compressor and figuring out what those knobs do. And then eventually you could sit down or even borrow one from a sound man or sound company or go to a studio sometime and have them run you through the knobs and functions of what this what a little bit more advanced compressor will do. Well, as you may have noticed, I have 2 chords coming out of my bass. What in the world is up with that? You may wonder. Many people do. Basically, I'll give you a quick history of what happened. I had an old P bass, my first bass, Fender P bass, which has one pickup and one output. And that was my standard bass I had, plugged into a Fender Super Bassman, which is my first real bass amp that I ever had. I lent my amp to another guy that had a Gibson bass, and the Gibson bass has this big fat EBO style pickup on it. This happens to be a DiMarzio Model 1, as this is a DiMarzio P model, actually a Willpower model, my own design here a little bit. And I love the sound of the Gibson bass because it reminded me so much of the early like Beatles and Paul Samwell Smith, where you just hear the super deep low end and almost no note definition other than what the frequency of the note itself is. And I love that, but alone, it didn't work for me. So I thought, well, why don't I combine the both of them together? So I actually wrote to Gibson and got them to send me an EBO pickup. Went into my living room with a chisel, took the pick guard off, chiseled a hole, got the pickup jammed into my P bass. My mom had to vacuum up all the chips. And basically, I didn't know how to wire up a switch, so I just ran the output of it next to the other output of the bass, because I knew my amp had 2 inputs. And I just used 2 cords and plugged one pickup into one channel and another pickup into another. But I found out it was an interesting thing that they no longer fought each other. So if I was playing one pickup through one amp and played a really loud, all the grind and crunch and hit would pull all the low end out of it, and it wouldn't come back in until after I kind of let the note go a little bit. In other words, that's why your stereo has a woofer and a tweeter. For one speaker to reproduce all the sound frequencies from the very highest to the very lowest, it's a lot of work for one speaker. So they split it up and make the tweeter do the highs and the woofer do the low ones. So that was basically the idea behind this, is I'd have one pickup doing 1 amp for lows and another pickup through another amp for highs. And without any EQs or crossovers or any fancy schmancy stuff, I basically would trim low end off the high amp and trim high end off the low amp. So basically I had a low amp that sounded like that, just low, and the high amp. Now you can hear all the articulation in the high amp. And the low amp is all the real bass. Together, so without having one amp fight the other amp anymore, I was able to keep low frequencies happening and also get all the nuances, harmonics, and things out of the high end as well, which helped me at the time because it was in a 3-piece band, and it was difficult sometimes without another guitar player or keyboard player. We just say guitar, bass, and drums. And when the guitar player would play a solo, I wanted to really be big and huge underneath it. So I had these 2 amps that basically did a guitar-like tone, along with a bass tone. So then I began to discover, as the years went by, I wasn't the only one that did that. Rickenbacker basses had a thing called Ricco Sound. It was a pickup or an input on the bass, which basically was a stereo output, which gave you a separate output for each pickup. All the Alembic basses, I'm not sure if they do that anymore, but initially all the Alembic is a very famous handmade bass company who make these spectacular basses. All of them came with dual outputs, one output per pickup. Then I read an article about John Paul Jones from Led Zeppelin. He did the same thing with his bass. He ran separate outputs from each pickup. John Entwistle did a similar thing as well. So independently, a lot of guys were coming up with the solution to the problem, which was, if you want to do a little grind or put some crunch on your bass, you're going to lose all your low end. So what do? Well, let's just get another amp to do the low end. So that's basically what the principle of it is. Now, this happens to come like this on this particular Yamaha bass. The Attitude comes with the dual output and the dual pickup thing. Basically, knob-wise, I just have a volume control on this. So it's this pickup, volume, and output. This one here is volume and tone, because once in a while I'll use a little tone on that pickup, but not very often. I learned a long time ago that the tone control on the Fender P-Bass may suck a little bit of volume out of your output, so I just removed it, and I never used it anyway. It was always treble all the way up, so I just use it like that. But any bass can be accommodated in this way. You can basically, if you have 2 pickups on a bass, you can wire it yourself if you know how to, or get a repairman to do it. And then we come to the problem of what do you plug into. Basically, I'm into 2 amps. One for lows is basically a straight out SVT 4 Pro, pretty flat. I've got compression in the effects end for a little extra compression. And the other amp is also an Ampeg SVT, but I'm going through several preamps, I'm sorry, not several preamps, but several points here. The Pierce preamp I'm using right now. This is an ancient, no longer made preamp that has a particularly amazing sound to it. This is my original version that I got in 1979, and it's still running. It's all solid state. Compression, a little noise gate because some of the distortion gets a little bit loud. If I turn the noise gate off, you can hear a little bit of noise, so we just gate it out there. There's a few other things in the rack here which aren't being used right now, but one thing I want to point out that's important to me is the Ampeg SVP BSP preamp, which is basically a replacement for this Pierce. Since the Pierce is no longer made, what am I going to do with this breaks down, or I'm no longer using it? I'll demonstrate how to set up and how to use the Ampeg preamp later. But basically, it's here as a backup to the Pierce because it does almost exactly the same thing. The pierce is 2 channels, one clean and one distortion. But the clean always stays on, and they're always mixed together. So when I turn the distortion on, I still have some clean tone underneath there, so there's still some semblance of the note, and there's still some articulation, and it's not just a buzz of distortion. So basically the basic bass tone. Now in varying levels you can do that with, and now I'm going through 2 cabinets also. The 1 amp, the low amp comes out of here, and the high amp comes out of here. Sometimes you might want to flip-flop them, do the high from there and the low from there. It depends on what your personal taste is. And again, this stuff is very proprietary to me only and what I do for my sound. But hopefully, by explaining this, you'll be able to see what you're doing, how it might compare to this, and how some of this may solve some of your problem, or how some of this might be some of your problem, and how you can eliminate it. Either way, it can go either way, because it depends fully on your own opinion of your own self and your own desire to play the way you want to and sound the way you want. This happens to be a real hybridized, proprietary, specialized thing that's been fine-tuned over 4,000 gigs, literally, where each night, and I'm still tweaking. I'm still occasionally I'll tweak a little more high end, a little less low end, a little more different mid-range frequency, things like that. So it's an ongoing, it's a work in progress, and it's more of an art than a science. So to try and break it down as to an exact thing of exactly what everything does and exactly how it all works together would be difficult, if not impossible. But basically, this is an overview of the dual output setup from the bass, why I use it, why it may be valuable or worthless to you, and how it's amplified, and therefore how any of this may relate to you is fully up to you. Again, the 2 Ampeg SVTs are the main amps, low and high. That's why I call it low and high. Low and high pickups, blue and red, blue and red. The high amp has a little bit extra stuff before the input, and the low amp is pretty much straight. And that's basically a summation of why 2 chords are coming out of my bass. There are several other components on my bass, or aspects to it, that help me do some of the things I do, which may help you if you want to expand your playing or maybe go off in a different direction. One of them has been very, very important to me, and it was such a big help and so vital to a lot of my right-hand technique that I actually was afraid about telling it for a long time, because I was afraid everyone else is going to grab it and I'd be left in the cold, because it's such an essential component of the ability to play really fast with your right hand. So I had to make a conscious decision whether or not to keep it a secret or not. And at one point I just said, what the heck, I might as well tell people. Most of the licks I have, I've stolen from someone else anyway, so it's only fair. Now here it is. Basically, on all my basses, I have this pickup here, the P-style pickup. This is a DiMarzio Willpower pickup. It's a special pickup DiMarzio makes for me. Underneath, the pole pieces go all the way across. In other words, that's just 2 and 2. There's pole pieces everywhere, so as you bend the string, there won't be any dropouts. That's one of the features of the Willpower pickups. And it's also covered. Now, this particular pickup happens to be covered with the same material as the pick guard, so it kind of matches. But not all of them are like that. Some of them are black. Basically, the pickup is encased in epoxy. And I can't touch the pole pieces physically. I can touch the pickup. But when you touch the pole pieces, you notice if you have a P-style bass, take your hands off the strings, plug it in the amp, touch the pole piece, and it'll buzz. So in order to remove that buzz from my old style Fender P-bass pickups, maybe they don't anymore, I don't know, it was just an aspect of it, I covered it up with epoxy. And then I noticed that my playing was going really well and everything was working fine. And I decided at one point to lower my pickups down into the bass a little bit more as an experiment, and I couldn't play. And I finally realized, aha, here's what's happening. My fingers actually are rubbing across the top of the pickup, and the string is in the way. So basically I'm rubbing across the pickup. So this does several things. What this does is it stops my finger from going any farther than that, so it won't overshoot and catch on the string, and it won't undershoot and miss the string. It'll always hit because the finger goes on the pickup right there and pulls across. The finger hits at the same spot on my, or the string hits on the same spot on my finger every time. And I actually have adapted my playing so that the 3 fingers will play on that pickup. So basically the pickup is a ramp underneath the strings, brought up very close to it. And if you push on it really hard, it doesn't go in. I have a special rubber tubing and foam and springs and things in there to prevent the pickup from moving around. It's bolted in there, and it's solid and up against the strings as close as it can be. At the very top fret, there's not a lot of room between the string and the pickup. But you'll notice my fingers can fly across quite smoothly. If I move off that pickup, I'm exaggerating, of course, but basically I'm overshooting and undershooting, so it's not as smooth as. You see how it catches and falls apart when it's not underneath there. There are other players that are aware of this and that I've seen. I may be mistaken, but I went to see the Gypsy Kings one time, and I think I saw the guitar player with a block underneath his guitar. He's a fingerstyle player. I may be mistaken on that, but I think that's what I saw. Another bass player by the name of Gary Willis makes a thing called a Willis ramp, which he actually sells, which is a similar thing. It's a little block that goes underneath your fingers, so it helps you to play on that and gets a consistency of tone and enables you to do those 3-finger or multi 8th, 16th note things. Smooth and fast and even. So that was a secret of mine for a long time, and I was afraid to even tell anybody because it's such an essential part to being able to play something at that speed and that kind of consistency. So that might be something you might want to try. This is all homespun mechanics, you know, chisels and epoxy and super glue. Now some of it is done for me, thankfully, from the Yamaha Custom Shop or from DiMarzio. They do some of these things for me. But basically it was brought about by me just experimenting by myself, you know, hammering things, chiseling things, epoxying things, super gluing things, doing all these things I had to do to get that pickup up close under the string solidly. So like I pointed out with the amp, it's more of an art than a science, and it's infinitely variable. So what's right or comfortable for you may be completely different than me. As a result, when slap players pick up this bass, they usually hate it because this pickup is here in their way, and this is right up against the string, and they just don't like it. I've learned to adapt. Oh, anyway, adapt my slapping to fit in there so that I don't get in the way. But most slap players pick up this bass and they hate it right away because all this stuff is in their way. But these components are essential for me to be able to do that. Those notes to go by super fast and relatively smooth and relatively in time. That's a super important component of that. So it may take some experimentation on your part to be able to do something like that or get something like that that helps you. And then again, it may not apply to you or your playing at all. But that's a super important thing to me that I wanted to share with you. One other component, which is very, very important, and I've had people comment to me from all over the world, send me emails and letters, that this one point was more important than anything myself or anyone else had said regarding their playing. That's their quote, not mine, is, believe it or not, the length of the strap. Now, it can seem very stupidly simple to you, but as I'm sitting here practicing and playing, my hand is at a certain angle, my arms, the bass is sitting right here. Now, if I stand up and the strap is too long, it's going to be in a different spot, and it's going to change the angle of my hands and arms and throw a variable into the whole equation. But if it's the right length, as I stand up, it's still exactly in the same spot as it is when I'm seated. It's a very, very important part of this whole equation. All these component parts that have to be put together in order to get to the end result of, I guess, advanced playing or some fancy licks or some more advanced stuff. the more variables there are, the more things are going to change. And if you've practiced things a certain way and suddenly you are thrust into a situation where it's different, it's not going to be the same. So the things you tried and could do then, you may not be able to do now because something's different. And that different thing is the angle of your hands and your arms when you stand up and the strap is super low and it's way down, and it looks better down low. I mean, that's definitely a cool thing. I see a lot of guys in bands now that are bent way over and playing down low. It definitely looks better. It's a lot of fun to play. I guess you could just, like, you know, get on the floor for a second and play your fancy lick and then stand back up. There's a million ways to go about it, and there's a zillion styles and you know, a billion thought combinations on how it should be. But nevertheless, I've seen a lot of people be able to articulate all kinds of incredible stuff, go on stage. There's one big thing that's different, and they can't do any of it, and that is either the strap is too high or too low or whatever. But I try to make the strap so that the angle and position I'm practicing in is the same one as it is when I stand up and start to play. Sounds really stupid and simple, but believe me, it's made a big impact, and I bring it up again only because I've gotten such response from it. Another component part of my bass I want to talk about is the hip shot detuner, which I use a lot. It's basically a little knob on the back, a little lever rather, on the back that I flip, and it moves the whole tuning peg and enables me to drop that low E note down to a low D. So for a heavier track or whatever, if I need just a lower note. So I can easily get down to that low D. Now, people who have hip shot detuners often ask me, well, how do you get it to stay in tune and whatever? And of course, I stretch the strings a real lot before I play, so they're not going to go out of tune no matter what. But when I put the lever back up, one little move I do, I grab the string, pull it, and then pull the lever up, and then let it go. And it's out of tune. It wasn't supposed to be, but there it is in tune. So you drop it, put a little tension on it. For some reason, it goes a little sharp sometime. And I've gotten a couple of emails about this. It's just the nature of the beast. It's more of an art than a science. This thing is indispensable to me, and a lot of players have used it. It's available for guitar as well, which is great. And I just give a little tug as I give a pull. Be analogous to, I guess, not that I want to put myself in his company and dishonor him in that manner, but when Hendrix used to drop the vibrato bar down, before he went to playing, he'd give it a little pull up to make sure everything was snapped in. So it's a similar thing to that. So when I drop it down, when I put it back up again, I just get a little tug on the string to make sure that it's in tune. And those are a couple component parts of my bass that and some of the aspects of it that assist me in being able to articulate some of the things I do, which maybe, if unknown, would make some of the things I do more difficult. And we're trying to make them as easy as possible for you to illustrate them for you here today. Okay, now I'm going to do a couple of things to show you how all the component parts of some of the things I described about the amp, the strap, the pickup, all those things fit together to do some playing at an accelerated rate. Anyway, here's a very simple, basic riff, lick, scale exercise that you can do. Basically, it's basically it's an A major scale, but basically I'm doing 1, 2, 3, 4 4-note groups, and then I start on 2 of the first group to do the second group. So here's 1 of the first group, then so that's basically the lick. Now the reason why I use something like that to practice and to work on is because it really works my right hand. All those things. Now, sometimes I'll break it apart and do components of it. To any lick or any series of notes, or any music, period, can be cut up into its component parts, analyzed bit by bit, and eventually figured out, understood, and played. And I'm confident that almost any player can play anything if you do that enough. If you pull it apart enough, you can do that. So let's just pull apart the first part of it. Basically, that's. I'll just do those two strings. Now to recover, I'm gonna go. So the last to recover are going to be all ascending note. So now slow again. Now my right hand should, in theory, be playing always in that direction from ring, index, middle, without that sequence breaking up. I think it is. I may be wrong. But eventually you can get to a point where we can go pretty blazing fast if you... Now all the component parts are in place. That pickup is underneath there. I'm playing on it. My action set up good. The bass is locked in position. My hand is right here. You know, my amp is set in a way that I can hear what I'm doing very well and respond to it. If the bass starts to, if I hit a note and it gets a little clicky, I know right away with my hands what to do. So all these component parts and many years of playing are all coming together to this one point to be able to play things like this. And eventually you can get up to a blazing... Now you don't almost never need to play that fast. And that lick may be of no value to you musically ever, but as a demonstration of the fluidity and accuracy and strength and timing of your fingers, it's a good thing sometimes to practice things that you may not even end up using, just because later on you'll benefit from it. So again, now that whole thing is made up again of the half step, whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step, half step. So now pull that apart if you have trouble with it with your left hand or your right hand. Let's go with the right hand or the left hand first. I'll start to do an exercise based on just that one simple, basic kind of exercise lick. So left hand only. Those are the notes that those fingers play. Those two, those two, those two, and those two. So let's just isolate them. Now we're starting from the index finger and going up. Now I'll start from the finger that's above it and go down. You can see as I play this, there's certain parts of it that are weaker than others. And those are the things I need to work on and that you'll find out you need to work on. And again, this isn't music. This isn't playing. This is exercise and mechanics. Later on it will lead to music and playing or enhance your music and playing, but don't make the mistake that this is music or that it's playing. A lot of times I'll mute down here and just be able to hear what my fingers are doing up here so I can tell which one is lagging. Many times my right hand will make up for a mistake that the left hand makes and I won't even notice it. So I'll isolate them one hand at a time sometimes to see if that's the case. And the rest of the moves my fingers do in this. That's the other moves that the other fingers make. So I'll isolate that. Oops, a couple of mistakes in there, as you can see. It's an art, not a science. Getting it down now. This is a tough one. So because it's a tough one, let's take it across the neck all the way. Grind on that until it's painful, hurts. Again, it's unpleasant and it's not music, but later on will lead to more fluidity so your music will express yourself, your ideas better. Now again, I'm going from low to high, lower note to the higher one, and reverse it. That's a tough one. Now, to get even crazier with it, let's try some variations on that where we're going. So we're going. Sorry, it's difficult. Miss notes in there. I notice that when I go like that and try to pull in there and get that note, pull this finger off and get in there, it's weak. So I know that's what I need to work on. Now I'm troubleshooting. Now I figured, aha, this move here is weak. So I'll just hold one finger here. That's the move that ain't working. Pull it out and isolate it. That's the spark plug that isn't firing. Pull it out and re-gap it, I guess. I don't know, whatever you do to spark plug to make it work. Or replace it. Can't replace your finger, so just do this. So I'll isolate the muscles of the area I'm having trouble with. Now after I do all those exercises, going back to the lick again, it starts to smooth up for me a little bit. It feels a little bit better. As I'm talking, I'm getting, my warm-up is dropping out, so it's difficult for me to play sometimes, but I notice that's good though, because it shows me what parts I need to work on. Then as I do those exercises and go back to the lick, I do notice that it is smoother and it works better for me. And again, using that in music is a whole other story. This is just basically an overview on what I'll do when I take a lick or a run or a bunch of moves and play them across the bass and then start to troubleshoot. What's going on? Why isn't it working? Why isn't it happening? Now the right hand is a whole different story. Basically, now, I'm not sure, sometimes it's difficult for me to play that actual sequence without that going in my mind. It's hard to do. So sometimes what I'll just do is go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, back and forth across this strings ad nauseum. Again, it's not pleasant, it's not music, it's not fun, it's painful, it's uncomfortable, but these component things, when I work on them, they do help my playing a lot. See, I'm catching there a little bit, so I know that's the area I have to work. So let's just isolate just the E string. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And instead of just working the E string alone, I'll go to the A and back and forth, because it's a transition when you jump from one string to another you're getting having a problem with. So I'll do the transition. Then I'll really throw myself a curve and do a transition to jump a string. That makes my hand, I have to lift up to get my fingers up over to that with a lot more strength than I have to just go to the A string. So now when I go to the A string, in theory, it should be even easier. You see it's starting to smooth out a little bit. It'll be a little bit better than when I first went at it and was clickety-clacky and made a lot of mistakes. So now, after having done both those exercises with both hands, putting them together as a component part, it should it may not sound like it to you, but to me it feels more comfortable, it's smoother. Now, just to expand on that, you can now go to different patterns. Here we're doing that pattern. Go to I think that's it. Oh, sorry. That's a note, not that. After a while, you get to a point where you'll train your ears to hear when you make a mistake rather than to watch your fingers. So, you know, that's not the right note. That's the right note. After a while, you begin to hear these cascading notes go by, and the chords that they make, and the sound that they make, and the tonality of it, you'll be able to tell by your ears where you're making a mistake, which is really good. Because then after a while, you want the ultimate end result of this is you want to remove yourself from your hands, remove yourself from thinking about mechanics, remove yourself from thinking at all, and allow yourself to do your art without having to sit there and figure out technical things. A big problem a lot of guys have, I believe, in my humble opinion, is actually we call them shoegazers, guys that stand on stage and they watch their shoes and they're thinking of what scale they're doing and thinking about what they should do next. To me, that's not entertaining and it's not communicative and it's not really art. It's more just on a game of Pac-Man, you can come up with enough patterns to get the high score. And basically, I guess on bass or guitar, if you learn enough patterns and licks, you could theoretically be a good player. I don't believe it actually works like that. There's some guys that don't know any of this, that don't play technically at all, that are sloppy and a mess and barely play in tune, and they're fantastic, and we love to listen to them, and they're incredibly successful. And sometimes incredibly successful internally too, because they're really expressing their art. So don't get caught up in the technology of this. Basically what we're trying to do is show you some component mechanics to help you rise above that, so that you won't be stuck in, how do I do this? How does it work? Why, you know, all these things you may be asking yourself, may be worried about. Now once you can get it and get a handle on it and get better versed with it, you can remove yourself from it and then worry about actually creating music, which again is a different thing than playing the lick. There you have it. One thing I try to keep in mind in my playing is a concept called economy of motion. What I mean by that is I try to get as much as I can without having to move my hand around a lot. I lock my hand in a position, and when it's in a good solid spot, it's kind of easier to get notes out of it from there. For an example, I do a lot of things where I bar 2 strings, and also use another finger and use this joint without having to jump around from string to string. I'm just kind of flopping this joint down on that and then lifting it up. While the first original finger stays on the first note, that stays there, and this thing will... So we get that. Without a lot of motion, I'm getting a lot of notes. Pull off it a little bit. So that's why sometimes I'll hold that on there, in case I do pull up. Now, another lick you can do with that, including 3 strings, which I use often. The key of C. There's not a lot of movement. Basically, I'm just lifting up my hands, putting them down, putting that there, lifting them up, putting them down. So it's pretty easy with my hand locked in this position to get a real solid, strong performance out of this without having to move my hand around and waste a lot of energy, motion, and time. Now I'll do a little different pattern. I'll go to this note here. Slow. Also, some of the notes are ringing when I'm playing, making that chord. So it kind of makes it, brings it all together, because the chord you hear ringing underneath the notes. But it's just a way of getting a lot of notes without a lot of motion from your hand. Therefore, it's creating a lot of fluidity by not having to jump from place to place and maybe having a problem with your timing, because it takes you time to get from one spot to another. Just one little example. Now here's another example of how economy of motion comes into play, especially with your hand locked in one position and the ability of your fingers made to play more than one note at a time without having to individually finger them. It's just a simple C major arpeggio. Now you'll see what happens there. Try to break this down in sequence. There's your first note, second. I usually pull this off just to make that easier. But you notice as soon as this finger is done with its first basic note, and it's able to let go, it's already heading towards its second position. So that's what I mean by economy of motion. Once it's done, once one finger is done with one thing, it's heading towards its next job. See the smoothness of that, just the timing of it is very easy, because every finger is kind of moving in motion, in sync with each other. For the right hand, basically I'm just kind of sliding across, and I'm also doing a raking technique, which I'll explain. Basically, I hit a note, hit it down again with this hand without plucking it, and then I pluck the next 3, and then pull these 2, and then get the last note that way. So So I'm playing. So with the right hand, I'm going. But it sounds like. The raking technique I talked about is where I'm basically just pulling the note, the finger across. That's the whole raking technique. My this finger just pulling off 1, 2, 3, 4, and then pull off the last one. In the minor position, I'm using this finger to bar instead of in the major. It's this finger. In the minor, similar thing, but a different set of fingers doing different things. So it's a good to exercise in both. Same principles at work. Oops, I made a mistake there. Happens to the best of us. Anyway, that's the major position. Minor. So you see, economy of motion, I'm not flying around a lot to get that arpeggio. Basically, I just lock my hand in one spot. And the notes should roll out pretty easy. So give that a try. Again, apply the same principles. If you have a problem with this lick, pull it apart component by component. If this is a rough move for you, practice that. If that isn't working, practice just that. That's another move. You can practice that on its own. So pull it apart piece by piece, and you should have it. One other thing I'm asked about a lot is on vibrato that I do sometimes, I'll be bending the neck of the bass, and people ask me about that. How do I do it, and what's it for, and everything. I actually got it originally from Pete Townsend, I think, from The Who. When he would hit a big chord and just shake the neck, then I realized that I could, if I pushed against the bass with the strap on, it actually ended up bend the neck a little bit. Now this here is a stock production model Yamaha Attitude bass. This isn't a special one or a custom shop one at all. There's some extra things added to it. Basically, it's a production model. There's 2 bolts in the back here. To hold the neck in, there's actually 2 more bolts underneath here from the front. So it's a real solid neck to body joint. On my old P bass, it worked fine as well. Sometimes it would drift out a little bit, but on almost any bass I've picked up, you can bend the neck. I have heard rumors of people snapping their basses in half. So you got to be careful as far as how much actual pressure you can exert on it to do that. This bass, the body joins the neck at a very high spot, so there's a lot of neck to bend. So it makes it a little bit easier. I can actually bend the note. On a 5-string bass, your low note would be a B, so I can actually take a B note, drop my low E down to a D, and bend it to a B, so I can actually get a low B out of this bass. That's an actual. So in an emergency, if I needed to hit a B note, I could actually do it on this bass. You couldn't necessarily be playing along at the same time. But that's one of the a thing you can do on any bass and any guitar, but the things that will prevent you from doing it is having your bass, the strap connection to your bass. For me, mine is permanently connected. I get stove bolts and fender washers and put a grommet on this piece of material that is from a company called Buffalo Belt and Weaving. I don't know if they're in business anymore, but they used to make the belts that caught the F-14s that landed on the aircraft carriers. This isn't one of them, but that's how strong their belts are. And this is solid, and it won't bend, and it won't stretch, and it won't move. So when I push against it, it'll never come off. It won't come off from here. It's bolted in both spots. When the bass gets put away, the strap stays on it. just because I'm pretty rough with my bass when I play live, and I like to have that solid anchor that the bass is always there, always landing right there on that spot of my body and not moving around. Night to night, it's in the same position every night. So if something's wrong, I know it's me and not the bass and not the strap. So that's one of the reasons why I bolt that strap on, and it's helped me when it comes time to do things like to do a little neck bending thing. It's helped to make that happen as well. So that's the story of my strap. So tapping on the bass, tapping hammer-on pull-offs, they're sometimes they fall in favor and out of fashion and into fashion again here and there, but I'll just show you some basics on it so you can decide for yourself whether or not it's something you might want to do. If you know how to do it really strong and solidly, it will they'll probably end up in much better favor than if you just do them the lightweight way, because it really requires on a bass that you use a lot of strength. Guitar's got thin little strings and you can fly all over the neck with it, but on bass you really need to play it as though you were a bass player and you're not a guitar player. You're a bass player, so it requires a lot more strength and a whole different approach to it. What I do basically is it's kind of the addicted to that rush lick a little bit. Now, you see how I have this one finger on top of the other one? I have my thumb, my hand locked in there. Usually I have my thumb locked, or just make sure that my hands are solidly on there so they're not going to move around. So I'm really... Now I'm also damping all the other strings. So you're not hearing, which is another problem. You got to make sure and hold down every other string that isn't working or isn't sounding so that you don't hear it. What's happening there is that and that. So actually any one of my fingers isn't moving any faster than, but coordinated together, get this fast, ridiculous trill. As you move your hand around, you can basically so you move around on the scale. Basically, I'm just going. Moving along on the same scale. There are sometimes sometimes I'll hit a note, slide it up to the next one, and then pull it off. Basically, I'm always not always doing that. So basically that trill thing is one type of tapping, very specialized. You may never use it in anything. I mean, it's nice in some little... use it in some little piece, or it doesn't necessarily have to be a heavy piece or a hard piece or a rocking piece in order to use it. Little nuanced thing. There's all kinds of different ways of tapping. You can go from string to string, different ways of moving around, move up and down the neck if you want just a cascade of. I'll slide up to that note. Just try to remember the pattern that you have and what notes you're playing, and all of those are legal to hit with your hand and do in any kind of rhythmic sequence you can imagine. So basically, all those notes in there, I can hit, tap, pull off, move with the other hand, grab any one of them. combination thereof once you're in that scale, moving around on any string to string. But the important thing to watch is just watch, take a look, you'll be able to rewind this DVD and look at things over and over. Watch how my hands approach things. Keep in mind economy of motion. Keep in mind strength, keep in mind timing, and keep in mind just how hard you have to actually play it to make it sound and for that voice to be heard. As a bass player, you're playing things really hard, so you have to do the tapping in a similar way to make it worthwhile. Again, it may just be one little tiny little piece of frosting on a very big cake that you do one little tapping thing for your whole career even, or you ever record even one time. But just to know about it a little bit more and be able to do it with strength will, if you do decide to use any tapping, will at least make it very effective for you. Now, as I showed how important economy of motion is by locking your hand in one spot, here I'm not necessarily violating it if I'm going to move around a lot. So there's still an economy of motion there where you lock your hand in one position and then move that position up and down the neck, trying to get different spots to play your music from. So I'm going to play some licks that I do, some standard stuff for me that I normally gravitate towards. And keep an eye on it and watch if you can see the patterns that I'm doing. Basically, it's going to be in G major. So on the two strings here. Now you can apply this to the next two, the two before, all four. These apply across the board. So we're going to start it off on two to make it a little bit easier to explain. So the tone centers we're going to be in there is, again, G major. So that's G major. So I'm going to be doing something a little bit different here as well. I'm going to be doing a lot of, to hit that note, I'm actually plucking it with this hand. So I'm going, so it's kind of half of what you do when you're hammering. So I'll incorporate that with plucking on with the right hand as well. But basically what I'm going to try and show you here is how I move up and down in those same patterns. Since G is a legal open note in that scale room, why not use the open string? I use open strings a lot. So I'll do a lick roll. Now I'm moving my hand in that position. Next one. Next one. And just doing variations of those notes. Some of them I'm plucking, some of them with my right hand. It's an idea how to move around on two strings. That was the G major scale. Pick the scale you want or however you want to do it. We did G major because we had that open string there too. And it illustrates how those patterns in G major work. So you can slide up and down the neck on them. Get an idea how when you're moving up and down the neck to be able to stop at various points and do whatever you need to do in that position. So that's linear motion with still some economy of motion applied. I bend a lot of notes on the bass, aside from the neck bending thing. Do a lot of bending, and again on bass, it's a strength instrument. It's very important to make a few adjustments different from what a guitar player would do or what anyone else would do on any other instrument whose strings you might bend. Since bass is a kind of a string instrument, I use a lot more than one finger to bend. If I'm going to bend like I'll automatically, and without even thinking about it, and it evolved that way as well, put all the fingers I have behind it and push with all three of them. So I can really up there, and if I get a little bit of a vibrato on top of it. Again, here I got 3 fingers. Now, these are pretty thick strings. This is my rotosound set. The low E is actually a 110, which is pretty big. And you can do... actually bend that up to an E. You see how if I get underneath it, oops. I'm making this up as I go along, so this isn't planned out. Anyway, that's an idea. Now you watch my hands, rewind in slow motion, watch my hands as I'm doing this to see how I'm grabbing it, the amount of fingers I'm using, and how much strength it actually takes to really bend the bass string convincingly, smoothly, with a little vibrato on, to give whatever lick you're playing, whatever musical style you go towards, give it a little bit of character, a little... instead of going some random bass lick, why not go... to do some bending, instead of just going right up to the note, bend up to it. It's a convincing way to also mimic a little bit of what a fretless or stand-up bass would sound like, which is basically what the stand-up is the ancestor to this, and the fretless is kind of a hybrid between the two. So it's a way to make the bass sound and feel a little bit like the tone, that grindy sitar. And after a while you get accurate enough to get right up to the note you're supposed to get to, either whether it's a half step or a whole step bend. You don't do too much more than a whole step bend, and up here, it's a step and a half to get up to that high G. Anyway, that's the basis on bending. As I said, rewind the DVD and watch my hands and see how... I usually always get extra fingers in there to help push it and make it sound fluid and convincing and not strained. And so all the notes flow together in an even way. As I was explaining when I was bending how I have to get a lot of fingers up underneath the string to bend it properly and to really get a lot of strength to it, this enables me to get my finger underneath there without hitting the wood. Because normally if I'm going to hit the wood, it may drag and scrape on the wood. So I cleaned that out from the bass, you know, had it removed. My old original bass, I did it with a Dremel Moto tool. Now the Yamahas come with that built in. So it enables me to just get that high song-ending, applause-begging note. And also assists me with another thing called pinch harmonics, which I'll get into soon as well. But it helps me get up underneath there. A lot of people ask me about why these are scalloped in that way. I've seen guitar players who scallop the whole neck, but I didn't want to lose that much wood, so I just did the top few 5 frets halfway across to help me get that top high bend, get the highest notes I can out of the bass. One other thing I do that I get a lot of requests for an explanation is pinch harmonics. I got it originally from Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top, who I also got hammer-ons from. He's the first guy I ever saw do hammer-ons back in 1974. Sorry. A ZZ Top song, and I took it from there. Pinch harmonics basically are a guitar player's domain, but we can use them in bass as well as a little bit of a nuance, added effect, what have you. What I basically do is I'm plucking with this fingernail while I have the soft part of the thumb against there, and I pull off the soft part of the thumb right at the moment that I pluck. So it's kind of all one motion. And in a way I'm kind of pinching the bass string in between these fingers. So So it's a way to get a little bit of an extra tonality out of the bass when you're... Just a way to get a little bit more out of your bass than what we already have in it. Again, very simply, the fingernail against the soft part of the thumb. And there's harmonics all up and down the string, so. They're everywhere. So this is just an easy way to get them down here without having to reposition.